GDP growth for the first quarter of 2025 officially has gone negative, and Trump is already blaming Biden for this. What we're going to talk about here today is what is actually causing this and what the numbers actually mean. Hey everybody, welcome to my second channel where we talk about finance and economics in a much more casual setting. Let's dive right into this. And first, in order to break this down, we have to understand this equation. Technically, it's an identity, and that is GDP equals consumption plus investment plus spending minus exports minus imports. Okay, what this is basically saying is that the GDP of an economy equals consumption by consumers, investments by businesses, spending by the government, plus basically the trade surplus. So exports minus imports. In the United States case, that of course is a trade deficit. So this last portion of this formula, which is in quotations, becomes negative. Now that we understand that, let's put all the pieces together. So it was already predicted a couple of months ago by the Atlanta Federal Reserve that this quarter's GDP might go negative, and that prediction came true. But there's a little more to the story, because I'm sure you're well aware that if we have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, we would technically enter a recession. Not an official recession, but a technical recession. The official recession is actually declared by NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research. But most people consider 2 quarters a recession. Okay, now let's break it all down. What is actually going on here for this calculation that is used to basically calculate GDP is that because of Trump's tariff policies, a lot more imports into the country happened. Why? Mostly because of businesses trying to get ahead of tariffs and import supply and import inventory. Now, what this does is this causes a higher trade deficit, a higher goods trade deficit, which increases that last section, the negative of that formula. Now, this affects the rest of the formula, even though consumer spending remained pretty resilient, but government spending did shrink. The point of all this is that our trade deficit decreased the GDP formula by a whopping over 4%. That, of course, was carried by the other 3 portions of this formula, but it was still enough to make this quarter negative. Okay, now let's talk about a couple other things. The first is that Trump is blaming Biden for this negative GDP growth. With that said, it's interesting to see that for the last over 2.5 years, we have had strong, consistent GDP growth quarter over quarter. So then it's funny or a little bit odd to me that the first quarter that Trump comes into office, we all of a sudden get negative GDP growth, yet that is somehow Biden's fault. Is that true? Look, whether you are a Trump supporter or not, the fact of the matter is this reading, this negative GDP growth reading, is entirely 100% Trump's fault. And look, I'm not saying that it's necessarily that we're in for doom and gloom. What I'm saying is because GDP is calculated with this equation, because we had a larger trade deficit, primarily because of companies rushing to get inventory into the country to get ahead of the tariffs, we had a negative GDP reading. It is impossible for anyone to say that that is not directly Trump's fault. Trump has imposed and then removed and then imposed and then removed and then imposed and then removed tariffs multiple times on Canada, on Mexico, on China. Then he did blanket tariffs on everybody. Then he paused those for 90 days. This confusion, whether it is purposeful or not, whether the end goal is good or not, I'm not here to argue that in this video. What I'm here to say is that this reading is Trump's direct fault because of his policies. This is not a Biden thing. So it would be one thing for Trump to go on the air and just say, look, This is what is actually going on. This is how this is how GDP is calculated. This is the equation or the identity that is used to calculate GDP. This is why it was negative. Okay? It's not really my fault. It's not a big deal. That's one thing. But instead to go on the air and directly blame the previous president when it is so clear as day that the first quarter he is in office, we get a negative GDP growth reading because of his tariff policies is absolutely crazy to me. Okay, now with that said, these numbers don't necessarily signify that the economy is falling apart. Okay, this negative GDP growth reading is primarily because of these imports. Okay, because of how the formula is set up, this last section, exports minus imports, read a higher than usual negative because that section is usually negative because we import more than we export because we have a trade deficit. I've made plenty of videos on that, whether that's good or not. It's not inherently good or bad. It just is a thing. But because there was such an inflow of imports, mostly by companies trying to get ahead of the tariffs, we had a negative GDP reading. That's Trump's fault. I mean, it's clear as day. That is Trump's fault. Whether we can justify that and say, well, yeah, it's because, we're rearranging the economy, whatever you want to say, fine. That's fine. But Trump shouldn't argue that it's Biden's fault. That makes literally no sense. It's just choosing a scapegoat because it's a bad reading, when in reality, the numbers are just the numbers. The formula or equation is just the equation. That's what's used to calculate GDP. It is what it is. So I hope this video was informative. I hope it clarified kind of what is going on. This is Trump's fault, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that the economy is falling apart. Consumer spending is still relatively resilient, but government spending is down. That's mostly because, Trump has this huge initiative to go in and try to cut government spending, right? But we are a service-based, consumer-based economy. So when you have consumer spending as resilient, which is the consumption part of the formula, that's a good sign relatively for the economy. Yes, it's been consumers pulled back a little bit, but we're not in some like flashing alarm red territory, okay? This is because the formula GDP is calculated how it's calculated, we got a negative reading. With that said, Trump needs to just realize this is entirely his fault because of the tariff policy. I hope you found this video informative. If you did, please consider subscribing. This is a brand new channel, helps the channel out tremendously. If you like this casual style of talking about finance and economics, then you are in the right place. If you want a more structured format where a lot more editing, I put more graphs on the screen, more pictures, it's more cut and more edited, then definitely check out the main channel. That's just my name, Derek Polishek. We do videos there weekly. I'm going to try to do videos here weekly, twice a week, once every other week, basically whenever there's something important that we need to talk about. Because we have Trump as president and because his economic policies are, for lack of a better word, a little bit erratic, we're probably going to have a lot to report on this channel. I didn't say this at the beginning, but my name's Derek. I got my degree in finance. You don't have to. I've been investing basically my entire net worth for like the last 10 plus years. And I love this stuff. I've dedicated my life to finance. I love the numbers part of it. I love the statistics part of it. I love the theory part of it. And I love seeing it play out in real time and trying to break it down for you guys. So if that's something of interest to you, definitely please consider subscribing. With that said, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.